Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thanks for coming. I just want to introduce the third Climate Action Plan workshop. Thanks, everybody, for coming. We're really going to work on what we've been working on for the whole duration of the Climate Action Plan. Most diligently is the strategies. There's 6 tables with 6 different topic areas, and we're hoping we can go through those tonight, get some more feedback so we can finalize the Climate Action Plan. I'm going to introduce the consultant team. We have VHB, Resilience Planning and Design, and the Rockingham Planning Commission, and they're going to be working with us at the tables, and if you have questions, you can ask us as we go, but Donnie's going to give us a little presentation first, talk about where we've been and how we got here, and we'll move on from there.
All right, great. Thanks, Peter. So I'm going to do not a lot of talking this evening because we have 60 minutes of just full-on discussion. As Peter mentioned, there's 6 tables, 6 topics, and we'll get into that in just a second. I do want to briefly give you an updated 2021 GHG emission inventory. We did go back to some of the data. We removed some tags. We cleaned it up a little bit, so the numbers are a little bit different. Then I want to go into the draft GHG, and again, GHG is greenhouse gas emissions. The mitigation targets that we established, talk a little bit about the prioritized GHG mitigation measures. The mitigation is the reduction measures, and then have those breakout discussions for about 60 minutes, and then go through the table report backs, and then talk about next steps, and of course close with a little bit of a thank you. So for the updated 2021 GHG emissions inventory, I've given this spiel before. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. If anybody hasn't received this information, I'm happy to give it to you offline. But basically, the City of Portsmouth has conducted both local government and community scale emissions inventories in the past, 2006, 2012, 2018, and this 2021 inventory that we're reporting on tonight. Inventories are really helpful as a basis of identifying where the opportunities are for reducing your emissions, and they are, the starting point to, identify where your targets need to or can go in the future, and how to go back and measure the progress toward those targets, as time progresses. And there are historical snapshots of the progress that you've made over the course of your, climate action journey. They're based on the standards and protocols, so everything is standardized in terms of scopes, what you control, what you don't control, what is indirect versus direct, the categorization that is, and generally you're really using these and leveraging these greenhouse gas emissions inventories to, again, one, just measure where you are, and then track your progress in the future. There's some technical aspects of this. I mentioned scopes. Scope 1 is generally what you own and control with respect to the community. Scope 1 is all the emissions that are happening within the city's boundary. Scope 2 is generally related to purchased electricity, whether it's by the municipality itself or by residential, commercial, or industrial properties and landholders within the community. Scope 3 is everything else, so anything that's indirect, anything that you don't own, control, but you can influence. So things that fall under Scope 3 typically are employee commuting, for example, for the municipality. You can't necessarily say every employee must purchase an electric vehicle, but you could potentially provide an incentive for purchasing that vehicle, or you could provide a public transportation pass to enable them to take more sustainable modes of transportation. So again, that's something that is in not direct control, but indirectly can be influenced. And again, the emission inventories that are being developed, they follow a formula basically. So you have the activity data that might be the kilowatt hours that you purchase. You multiply that by an emission factor, and that gets updated regularly by several entities, including the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and that you get into a emissions value. So it's broken down by gas, but then all of the different gases, aside from carbon dioxide, are made equivalent to carbon dioxide. So you just have that one number that people can point to and say, that's how many emissions that you're generating. So that's an overly simplistic version of how we've developed the greenhouse gas emissions inventories, but suffice to say it accounts for a lot of data collection, and I know Kate's here today. She supported the development of the emissions inventories in the past, a lot of work coordinating with different departments, coordinating with utilities, all of that to give us the activity data that is needed to produce the emissions inventories. Now, when we look at the 2021 updated inventory, we see the distribution, scope 1, what they control, the municipality, what they control, 37.8%, and that's largely attributed to natural gas consumption within buildings and gasoline and diesel within their fleets. Scope 2 is electricity purchases, again, 51.2%, so just over the majority of that. And then scope 3 is transmission and distribution losses and energy-related activities, so methane leaks and things of that nature at 11%. So scope 3 is only covering those two categories, those two sources, T&D, transmission and distribution, and FARA, which is fuel and energy-related activities. Again, the leakage of the methane through natural gas distribution infrastructure. That doesn't account for the full value chain of the municipality. So maybe in the future, the municipality may want to broaden what it covers under scope 3. So it may want to look at its specific impact on waste. It may want to take a specific look at some of the employee commuting. It may want to take a specific look at its business travel, its purchase goods and services, things of those those natures. That would complete its scope 3 emissions. Now, again, we take a look at it from a more specific look, aside from the scopes. You start to see that 20% is stationary sources, 17.8% is mobile sources, and 51.2% is the purchased electricity. That equates to that scope 1 value. And the 11% is the fuel and energy-related activities. That equates to the scope 3 value. So broken out, scope 1 between stationary sources and mobile sources, you start to see that 20% is, the boilers and the natural gas usage, and 17.8% is that fleet, fuel consumption. And I should note that, due to the fact that we resolved some of the discrepancies in the data with the 2021 municipal inventory, we were able to do a direct comparison to the 2018 inventory, and we did see a 17.9 increase since 2018. And that could be accounted for in a variety of different ways: an increased population that is serviced, increased employee counts, increased square footage. So there's a lot of things that the city has done to reduce its emissions, like convert its streetlights to LEDs, but growth is a factor, so we have to take that into consideration. So when we're looking at the community inventory, we see a different story. Scope 1, being the natural gas and in-boundary transportation, accounts for 68.3%. Scope 2, again, is just the electricity purchases at 25.2%, and scope 3 is 6.5%. And again, just related to the fuel and energy-related activities, but also this scope 3 category includes solid waste generation. So everything that you're throwing away that's being disposed of in a manner that is not recycling or composting is getting covered under solid waste. So taking a deeper dive into the scope 1, you start to see that the stationary sources are just 7.9% of the total scope 1 value. We're really looking at that transportation piece of that pie at 60.4%. So everything that when people get into their cars, they're traveling within the city's boundary, all of the vehicle miles traveled that are accounted for within the boundary of the city of Portsmouth is covered here. So if it's, vehicles owned by the municipality, if it's vehicles owned by residents, if it's truck traffic coming into the city, if it's truck traffic leaving the city, anything like that, that's all related. And that's just on-road vehicle transportation. So other forms of transportation like off-road vehicles and the likes are not accounted for there. So it's a big portion of the community's GHG emission sources. So if you're sitting at the transportation table, we have to start thinking about what strategies, do we have the right strategies to really move the needle here at this and drive down that 60.4%. So the draft targets. So we took a look at the emissions inventories. We took a look at the state of New Hampshire. We took a look at regional entities, other sets of strategies that have been identified. We looked at the science-based targets as well, although these are not verified science-based targets. But basically, what we're looking at from a community scale activity standpoint, we broke it out, a short-term target, mitigation target, an interim mitigation target, and a long-term mitigation target. Both long-term mitigation targets here for the community and for the municipality are looking at net zero emissions. They're just scaled differently in terms of their schedule. So by 2030, we're looking to reduce 50% of the community's emissions from 2018 levels. 80% reduction by 2040, and then net zero emissions by 2050. For the municipality, 80% reduction from 2018 levels by 2035 and net zero emissions by 2040. So a little bit more aggressive on the municipal side because they have a lot more control over the emissions than they do on the community scale. So it's going to take a little longer to get there. And again, I mentioned, we looked at several other, sets of targets and documents. We looked at the climate science and what the IPCC is putting out with their annual reports and where, the trajectory to net zero is coming from and how that maps out time-wise. But some of those other documents are, the city's renewable energy policy that it passed in March 2018. They're looking to drive down their energy emissions to zero through that particular policy. There was no dates on that policy, but that was the general intent. And then for the state of New Hampshire, I said we're being a little bit more aggressive than the state, reaching 20% below 1990 levels by 2025 and 80% by 2050. Now, these are old targets, so I should say that the state is, if they haven't started already, going to be in the process of updating its climate action plan and potentially putting some regulatory tools and muscle behind some of the targets that are going to be established. Thus far, there hasn't been any of those mechanisms put into place, but for context sake, we are looking to be more aggressive than the previous targets.
Quick question.
Yep. Oh, sure.
Can you add in at 2030 for municipal? We have a 2030 that we're going to be tracking for community. It seems like it would make sense to do the same thing with municipal.
Okay. Yeah, what we do have as part of the facilitated exercise today is a discussion on the targets. So we should be writing that down. I mean, I'm making a mental note. But depending on how much sleep I get tonight, I may not remember it tomorrow. So let's get it written down. But that's a good comment.
Can I ask you about the goals here?
Yep.
Obviously, those are very aspirational. I was a state representative on the Science Technology Committee. We have no climate action in New Hampshire. In fact, even that 20% is being rolled back currently in
No.
the bill. So I assume this is just hoping that we can do.
Yeah, I mean, well, the state. I mean, I've received the targets from the state from an old planning document. As I note that this is an old set of targets. So and there's nothing that has been done recently on it.
There is no 80% state law.
Right. There's no regulatory backing. Oh, yeah, yes, I think we're saying the same thing. Yep.
On the same topic, the state is moving very quickly to update their very much up-to-date plan.
Yep.
And I think that the timing and the potential for alignment will probably be done with this before they're done with theirs, although they're moving very quickly. But I'm
Yeah.
particularly interested in alignment between any of the regulatory strategies that are in that plan that could support
Yeah.
our plan. It's almost like a footnote and an update to follow or an amendment.
We do actually have that. Actually, it was Kate that made the suggestion to add an enabling an action that pushes the city to be an active member in the updating of that particular document for alignment purposes and for advocating for the things that are going to help the city achieve its own targets.
Two-way
Yeah.
alignment.
Hopefully, yeah. So just getting involved in that process will help that along. Yes.
To what extent are we on
Right. So 2030, for the community scale. I mean, for the municipal scale, we're a little bit behind on where we need to be, right? So from 2018 to 2021, we increased by 17.3%. For the community scale, I wasn't able to do an apples to apples. So I have to just resolve a little bit more data in the community scale emissions inventory before I start putting forth changes between 2018 and 2021. So unfortunately, I don't have that this evening, but we can provide that in a future update. Okay, so the draft prioritized GHG measures for mitigation. We have mitigation and we have adaptation that we're going to be discussing tonight. I put that we have prioritized them, and I've used the term prioritized, and I'll get to that and the reason why in just a second. But by no means are these measures finalized. I just want to make that known. We do ask the question if there's any measures that are not listed in the strategies on your sheets, on your worksheets, that, we're still taking some input. We had workshop number 2 that was focused on soliciting and responding to some of the measures that have been put forth before. We've made some edits to those strategies, we've added to those strategies, and we've evaluated those strategies. But again, if there's anything that's missing, or if you feel like, this strategy is not a priority, we want to hear that this evening. But since workshop number 2, we have bucketed these measures under what I call pathways. So the pathways are generally the direction in which the city and the community are going to be taking to achieve its targets. So they're the same across the board, whether it's a municipal or a community-wide initiative. But the pathways, again, are looking at guiding and sort of summing up and summarizing how Portsmouth is going to be tackling its GHG emissions. 1 is building energy conservation and efficiency. 2 is clean buildings and transportation. 3 is renewable energy production and procurement. 4 is sustainable waste management. And 5 is climate smart land use. So again, all the strategies are bucketed under there. And so building energy and conservation is just strictly reducing the energy consumption. Clean buildings and transportation is the transition to sorry, I'm blanking at the moment. The infrastructure that's going to be taking advantage of the transition to renewable energy production. So it's the electrification of the building systems, it's the electrification of the transportation systems, or it's the reducing vehicle miles traveled through more pedestrian, more bike-friendly, more public transportation-focused initiatives. That's what we're generally looking at. The enabling of taking advantage of some of the renewable energy production, but also other ways of accomplishing the same system tasks without the use of the traditional forms of energy, if that makes sense.
What's your definition of clean? That's what we're trying to get.
So clean, in this case, because we're talking about the buildings and transportation, clean is also just walking, right? So it's not renewable energy, but it's clean energy because you're producing it yourself. So it's just it's a catch-all term here that we're specifically responding to renewable energy production and procurement under number 3. 2 is clean buildings and transportation being a catch-all for electrification and enabling the use of biofuels and enabling an increase in public transportation use and bike ped use and things of that nature.
Well, I asked that specifically because the clean
Yep.
energy label is being used by all kinds of people in different ways.
Right,
Nuclear energy is emission-free.
right.
So are you suggesting we do more nuclear energy?
No, but that's why I specifically use the term renewable energy production under number 3.
Clean is what I'm getting. That's all clean by a lot of people.
Well, we could, if that's a word that, we don't want to use, that we could, change it. We can provide that feedback. But again, it's sort of a catch-all to catch things that are not, energy-based. So, for example, again, I'll use the same, being a little repetitive, but moving people, from their cars to commuter bike lanes. That's, I would consider clean transportation. And again, there's a lot of opportunity at the tables to provide some more, additional feedback. We did go through a cost to benefit evaluation. We looked at several criteria: greenhouse gas emissions benefit, upfront cost, implementation complexity, staffing needs, sustainability co-benefits, and support for climate adaptation. For sustainability co-benefits, we looked at the categories that you see to the right. Basically, anything that scored high on this particular category hit more than just 1 or 2 of these particular co-benefits. So at the end of the day, what we really looked at was balancing the benefits, not just GHG, related sustainability, looking at the whole breadth of sustainability, and then taking into consideration, what is it going to cost the city to implement? So, looking at the fiscal capital cost, looking at staffing needs, and looking at how difficult is it going to be to implement. And that's how we arrived at some of the prioritized measures. Now, not everything is going to be listed on these slides. They're on your worksheets. I could just touch upon some of the highest rated measures by category. So, for example, for building energy conservation and efficiency, adopting tax incentives for multifamily and commercial buildings that are both highly efficient and fossil fuel free, implementing and enforcing building energy performance standards for community and for municipal, ensuring that all municipal construction projects are net zero ready, and implementing a building energy management system to monitor, measure, and control energy usage. Now, I want to take this opportunity to also explain the tables that are in front of you too. We have the ID, the C stands for community, the M stands for municipal, and then the BE stands for building energy, and each one of those are numbered whether or not they're in the community section or the municipal section. And those middle letters, those acronyms, are going to change from pathway to pathway. So just a little bit of clarification there. And for those of you that didn't pick up on this, the community inventory also includes municipal operations as well. So there may be some initiatives or strategies that touch upon both municipal and community-based inventories. So the C could be community, or the C can be community plus municipal. So for clean buildings and transportation, ensuring an update to the city's 2014 bicycle and pedestrian plan and implementing the measures that come out of it, making sure that they align with the climate action plan at the end of the day, and preparing an electric vehicle charging plan to identify feasible and strategic locations for publicly accessible charging equipment. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the city is going to take full ownership of those stations, but working with partners to make sure that the locations that are identified that are strategic and advantageous for charging stations, whether they're level 2 stations, potentially at grocery stores, or level 3 stations at highly trafficked areas, those are being installed in partnership, and also in consideration of a lot of those various federal and state, incentive opportunities. On the municipal side, focusing on that fleet electrification, as we saw, a lot of the emissions were Scope 1 emissions under the municipal inventory were associated with the fleet. Addressing that appropriately, and then assessing opportunities to optimize the size of the municipal fleet. So that's the other part of that fleet decarbonization process, making sure that you don't have an oversized fleet, that you don't have vehicles that are going to be consuming more energy just for the sake of, you want a bigger truck. Do you need a bigger truck, for example? So that's part of that decarbonization assessment. For renewable energy and production, amending zoning and other policies to eliminate existing barriers to solar development. That's an easy win for the city. Establishing targets to increase participant signups for the Clean 100 option, and setting targets. So that is a wonderful program. There is an option for 100% renewable energy, just setting a target and doing the footwork to get folks signed up for that option. And then on the municipal side, just doing a solar feasibility analysis across your properties, ensuring that those projects that are cost beneficial and are going to help you achieve your net zero targets are going to be implemented. And then tracking the renewable energy supply, and making sure that you're going to be meeting your targets at the end of the day. Sustainable waste management. I know a lot of folks in many communities are very focused on sustainable waste management. Conducting characterization studies to better understand the composition of the local government and the community waste streams. Because again, like the Climate Action Plan, if you don't know what you're dealing with, if you're not measuring, then you don't know how to tackle the specific issues. So for example, what materials are getting into the streams that you can maybe have targeted educational campaigns on to get them out of the municipal solid waste stream and into the recycling or composting stream. Food is a great example of that. Building off the characterization studies, we're saying that and proposing that you do a zero waste plan. That's going to impact both the community and the municipality to make sure or to see a 90% plus diversion rate toward a targeted year. And then create a voluntary certification program for the restaurants within the city working to reduce food waste. A lot of tourism in the city, as everybody knows, a lot of restaurants, a lot of opportunity to reduce that food waste through a targeted program. And then adopt for the municipality, adopting a municipal environmentally preferable purchasing policy that could be used as a model for the private sector. Climate smart land use. and I'll speed it up a little bit so we can get to the discussion. But looking at site plan regulations to require low-impact development, which is supportive of not only stormwater management, but increases carbon sequestration and sinks within the city. Rezone the Schiller Station area was a very popular strategy at the last meeting that we attended, just to ensure that the existing power infrastructure stays intact for future uses, such as energy storage and energy conveyance, related to offshore wind projects potentially. Publicly owned lands, making sure that you are managing them in a manner that is advantageous for sequestration and storage, and then identifying additional properties that would be suitable for those purposes. And then studying neighborhood completeness, making sure that the communities within Portsmouth have what they need so that they can get to them by walking or biking instead of having to get in their car. So what amenities, what needs are certain neighborhoods missing? And the city of Portland has done a wonderful study that can be a model for that. Climate adaptation measures, there are numerous here. So we broke it out into flood resilience, energy resilience, and heat resilience. I'll tackle a couple of for climate adaptation, but continue for flood resilience, that is, continue to identify critical public and private properties and infrastructure subject to sea level rise and address them through resilience measures. Establish a coastal flood hazard district with low-lying areas of the downtown. Establish a coastal flood mitigation fund using a percentage of the local room and meal tax receipts to support climate and flood risk mitigation projects, and conducting or updating previous hydraulic and hydrologic modeling studies of the storm drain system to make sure that it's going to have the right capacity for future flood conditions. And we have Tim from Rockingham Planning Commission here. He's going to be manning the climate adaptation table, and he can talk a little bit more about those specific strategies and more. For heat resilience, develop a citywide heat health warning and protection plan, assessing and ensuring public facilities, schools, and other critical facilities are resilient to extreme heat and provide access to cooling. Coordinate with annual heat resilience workshop to engage and support local regional healthcare providers, and integrate heat resilience goals, standards, and guidelines into open space and recreation planning for any planned improvements to existing open spaces in the community. And lastly, energy resilience, encouraging community-wide building weatherization measures for more resilience during extreme events so that heating and cooling is more effective and efficient. Remove any barriers in land use ordinances to enable the addition of exterior insulation and improve the efficiency in renovations, particularly to historic preservation projects. Identifying and mapping vulnerable electric and gas infrastructure, and work with Eversource and Unitil on the adaptation strategies as infrastructure is maintained and upgraded. So every time a piece of infrastructure is touched by the utilities, is there an opportunity to harden them for resilience purposes? And then investigate the potential for microgrids for critical municipal and public infrastructure that could continue to provide services if the regional grid does go offline, if there is a brownout. So now the breakout discussions, you'll all have an opportunity to read all of those strategies and more and discuss those strategies. Each table has one primary pathway to discuss, and all the facilitators will guide you through the questions that are on the table there, and I'll put them on the slide as we get to those that point during the breakout sessions. You'll have a secondary pathway. If you get to it, you're more than welcome to jump to the next. Each person has an individualized worksheet, but the facilitators will be taking their own notes so you can have a collective conversation. And if there's anything that you can't get in the conversation, or if there's anything that you really want to write down to make sure that I see, that the rest of the team sees, you could put it on your worksheet. There are pens. If you need more pens, just let us know. We do have extra worksheets as well. So if you want to have an additional worksheet, if you have a lot to say, just raise your hand and we'll get you another worksheet. But we're going to talk for about 60 minutes. I think we're doing pretty well on time. Use the questions on your worksheets to guide the conversation, like I said. And just, some ground rules. Everybody gets a chance to talk. But again, if, you prefer not to talk, that's okay too. Just put it on the worksheet. Be respectful to everyone's contributions. Not everybody is at the same level of understanding the strategies, understanding greenhouse gas emissions, understanding climate action. So just be patient with people. Everybody has something to provide. If you get stuck, just move on. You may not have an answer to all of the questions that we're asking tonight. and then, be creative and fun. It's a good opportunity to talk with your neighbors, to bounce ideas off of. One person's ideas may evoke another idea in your head that you really haven't thought about before. In terms of the targets, we're going to have general conversations that the facilitators are going to ask. So there's no specific worksheet for the targets, but each of the facilitators will just ask simplistic questions. Do you agree with the targets? Why or why not for each of the municipal and the community scale, at the municipal and community scales? We want to know, are we being ambitious enough? Are we being too ambitious? Do we need a 2030 target for the municipality? Those types of questions. If there's any other questions that you have on the targets, the facilitators, can help, facilitate that discussion. But again, we wanted to just hear your thoughts and feedback. And one note on the targets is that once we start to finalize the strategies or the measures that are getting included in the CAP, we have to do a bit of gut checking, right? So if for whatever reason folks take strategies out, we add new strategies in, we have to gut check that and make sure that the targets are going to line up with the measures. Because if we put forth measures that cumulatively aren't going to reach get the city to reach the target, that's going to be a mismatch, right? That's going to be a problem. So we're going to do a gut check at the end of this workshop before we start preparing the full draft CAP. Just make sure that the targets and the measures are aligned. But we still want to hear your feedback on the targets tonight. And then, the third question on this is, aside from the prioritized mitigation measures, what does the city require to be successful in reaching its reduction targets? Is it willpower? Is it, strong leadership? Is it, proper direction? Is it continuous education? There's a lot of things that could be added to this list here and discussed. So we want to hear, what is it going to take? Aside from the specific measures, what could be a blockade? What could be what could embolden the city in reaching its targets? And then the questions for the breakouts, these are on the worksheets, but we generally want to know about what requirements are going to be necessary to implement. What are the blockers? What are the barriers preventing strategies or measures from being implemented and being successful? Have you seen the measure implemented anywhere else? Because we do want to know about that, because there's good lessons learned out there from other communities and other organizations on similar type strategies. So we want to see what worked, what didn't, because we will be developing an implementation plan that will consider things like what are the key steps and what are some key considerations that the city needs to be aware of before they jump into implementation. This one is important. Who and what groups, whether they're local or otherwise, need to be or should be involved in the planning of the implementation measures. So if you feel like there's a particular agency at the state, if you feel like there's a regional NGO, a non-governmental organization, if you feel there's a local committee that needs to be involved, if you feel the universities needs to be involved, who does the city need to contact to really make the implementation a success? And for a lack of a better phrasing, who would be peeved if they were left out of the conversation? Who could potentially, speaking of, who could be potentially left out of the benefits or be harmed by the implementation of the measure? So generally, we're trying to get at the equity and justice aspect of implementation. We have these measures. We want to make sure that nobody's going to be left out. Some of them are going to result in benefits. Some may be harmed by some of the measures. If you think about the energy transition, that could increase energy cost. And if you increase energy cost, then that increases the energy burden. And then who can potentially be harmed by that? And that's not necessarily set in stone, but that's a typical example that is utilized. And then, do you have any other comments on the measures? Anything that wasn't covered by the questions? And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, any measure that we're missing, that the city should prioritize. We had a long list of 80 measures coming out of workshop number 2. We whittled it down. On your sheets are about 8 measures per category, so we're at about 40 plus right now, minus, in addition to some enabling actions that are on some of the main handouts. But if there's anything that we're missing, if there's anything that you feel we should have really pushed up the ladder there, then do let us know. And then once that's over, we'll get to some table report backs. So, with that said, is everybody comfortable with the table that they're sitting at? Everybody's aware of, go ahead.
Just one quick question. The first one is community scale, the second is municipal,
Well, you know, I use that, so, no, the third, I use the term city, sorry. I use the term city because they're going to be the instigator in a lot of these things. They're going to be supporting the community, enabling the community to move forward. The community, of course, has a role to play, a responsibility, and that's, you know, a big one. But the city is sort of the coordinator. So I use the city in that terminology. But you can consider number 3, to your point, city and community. If anybody doesn't have a table, Kate you're looking at clean buildings and transportation. So Kate, raise your hand. All right. Garrison, where's Garrison? Garrison, you are working on solid waste and climate smart land use. Tim is climate adaptation. Oh, Peter's renewable energy and procurement. And Steve, where are you? Building efficiency and conservation. Is there any questions beforehand? Before we get started? Okay, your time starts now. Okay, folks, the mic has been turned back on. All right, so we're going to do some, hopefully you guys had some good productive conversations. I'm going to ask the facilitators to just come on up and just give us a very 30-second to a minute update on what folks were talking about so that everybody can be clued in. I know each table was focused on their own individual pathways, so to hear about what other folks were talking about on other pathways would be helpful. I sat at the renewable energy table, and we talked, we got a little sidetracked at first, and maybe the building and energy efficiency table talked a little bit about this. But when it comes to historic properties, and it was related to our first measure about amending the zoning code to make sure that solar is enabled and that there are no barriers to solar development or other renewable energy development, we talked about the installation of like heat pumps and building envelope improvements and how having a historic home that's designated within a district can prolong the permitting process and can be difficult for folks that own those homes. We talked about maybe broadening some of the measures to include more than just solar. We talked about the difference of RECs, and that's a very technical component of it. It's not necessarily the most preferable way of going about it. That's the renewable energy credits that you get from Clean Power. Clean Power purchases RECs. They retire those environmental attributes that say that you own the GHG emissions benefits, but there's a hierarchy: solar that's installed on site, solar that's all installed off site that you own or engage in through a PPA, power purchase agreement. Basically, the closer to your home, the better. And RECs can oftentimes be located far away. So, but for folks that live in multifamily homes and unable to install their own solar or access solar otherwise, RECs are a good opportunity for them. Talking about again, the issues with the Historic Commission, getting the commission engaged is going to be very helpful. And to the success of any of these initiatives, thinking about poverty, procurement of renewable energy is going to be really, a blocker, for low-income individuals. We talked about geothermal, and we talked about wind opportunities. There's not necessarily the need for a large, tall turbine, but you could have cylindrical rooftop turbines that may be, suitable for certain properties. We also just talked about, the Schiller Station a little bit and the interconnection of the offshore wind, and maybe that's not something that should go in the CAP. Maybe that should be an enabling project. Maybe it should just be something that's advocated for that, it's outside of the control of the city of Portsmouth. But, we'll take a look at that. And we also just talked about just sheer economic sense of some of these different initiatives. But then, having a central repository for all of the education and the incentives that are available for procuring renewable energy and installing renewable energy. So that's for my table. Kate, do you want to come up and talk about clean? Oh, we have a microphone. No need to get up. That's great.
Yep. So we were talking about clean buildings and transportation at our table. And one of the first things right off the bat that we started talking about was how a lot of the strategies in this particular pathway were mostly transportation and not really buildings. So we talked about maybe phasing out that phrasing in the pathway of having building, because we know that there's a separate pathway focused on building conservation and renewable energy and efficiency.
Okay.
So that focused a lot of our conversation, but in terms of community measures, a lot of them were updating the bike ped plan, preparing an EV charging plan, expanding public transport, working with regional transportation partners. And something that we kept going back to discussing these measures for community is sort of how they're very enabling, but how can we measure greenhouse gas reduction from these? And so that sort of turned into, well, first looking at municipal strategies under this pathway, you could easily see that a lot of them could easily be measured for greenhouse gas reduction. You could sort of see that year by year if you were trying to electrify the school bus fleet. That's something that's easily measurable. But for community stuff, we were trying to talk about sort of what sort of additions could be added to a lot of these strategies to make them measurable, to make them more behavioral. So a lot of things that we talked about was the barriers and the main issues with the community strategies were financial and, let me look at my notes, financial and behavioral issues. So obviously funding for a lot of these community things will be difficult. There's a lot of grant funding out there that we talked about, federal funding for municipal stuff, so municipal upgrading of the fleets, the school buses, things like that. But for community-wide transport, how do we find regional partners for that? Pairing with C&J and Coast, and how do we sort of get into neighborhoods and connect corridors that aren't really connected to right now? In terms of behavioral, we thought that was sort of like the ground up of where we should be going, is how we're going to pay for advertising and market and sort of have a campaign budget put together for changing behavioral, just the behavior of residents around town in terms of being more interested in taking public transport and sort of making that that real choice between taking their car versus taking a bus, or hopping on a bike or walking versus taking their car. And we talked about a lot of different examples. We had one member that had recently been to Hamburg, Germany, who noticed some really cool hybrid loops for bus systems that's similar to Uber, so sort of changing up the status quo of having a fixed route and maybe experimenting with some different sort of pick up when you're ready sort of systems, trying to get just different avenues of what we've been doing, and see some case studies around the country and internationally for just different things that we haven't seen before, and just trying to change up the status quo of what we've been doing for transportation. Hopefully that covered everything that we talked about. We talked about a lot of things.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. Looking forward to those notes. Peter, I think you also had renewable energy?
We had renewable energy. We also touched briefly on climate smart land use. But I'll talk about renewable energy first. I guess initially we kind of worked our way into it with looking at IRA grants and other grants that could be provided to enhance the amount of solar that's put on people's houses. There was a lot of talk about solar and how it would really help expanding solar. We talked also about, opting up with Portsmouth Community Power to Clean 100 and what kind of benefits that would be, and then got into a little bit of a discussion about just how that creates the RECs. And I think you guys talked about a lot of RECs too. We had a little discussion about RECs and how it's important to support it, but it's also important to have that energy generated locally. So a mix is kind of what we settled on, if we settled. And just overall, the need more renewables is only going to be a benefit. So more we can do to do that. We got into a little bit of discussion about offshore wind and how much control we do or we really don't have over it. But talked about in terms of Schiller Station, the grid tie that's there would be a really important area that offshore wind could come in, and it could get Portsmouth. If there's ways that we could encourage the property owner to provide that landing place for offshore wind, it could be a real benefit. But there was talk about how that's kind of a long-term goal, and in terms of targets, it's going to be maybe a longer range or longer end of the target side of things. There was talk about maybe there's a local group could go talk to the property owner, or people could get together and talk to the property owner and at least get them aware of that opportunity, which I think they probably already are aware of, but to encourage it, I guess. We talked a little bit about Ps and how much open or big buildings there are, open land or big buildings, big parking lots, and ways to incentivize solar on those big buildings and the parking lots out there at Ps, and how that could be a real game changer in terms of solar. So we talked about that, and then we went into the targets a little bit at this point. And I guess the first big comment was 2050 is too late, and need to do more, and need to really create a sense of urgency, and in some ways 2030 is too soon. It's hard to imagine transportation getting reduced so much that we could meet the numbers we have for 2030. But so it was kind of back and forth on that, but really overall it's not the target as much as how fast we need to go, and creating a sense of urgency for everyone. And so maybe the targets aren't as important as sort of promoting that sense of urgency. And what does it take to meet those goals? So this question was really an interesting kind of question that came out of or discussion that came out is, we talk about the targets and setting the targets, but what does that mean? Like, what is it going to take to reach that target in terms of reducing our usage, or how many solar panels do we need to put in? Or is there ways to make it relatable in the report, which I think would be really beneficial? I think it was a really great thing we came upon. I don't really have an idea, but maybe Donnie, we can put our heads together and come up with some ideas about that. But I think that would be really useful to give people something to sort of think about, sort of a budgeting exercise. Like, how do we get there, and what's the budget we're going to look at? And we also talked about, we kind of slipped back into the Schiller discussion about bringing power in and Schiller Station a little bit, and the idea of this. They used to have an off-peak program where if you ran your washer at night, you could save electricity. Why don't they have that anymore? And then we realized that the grid, they're always trying to meet this high top demand, and why aren't we always meeting that top demand, or what plants do we have to pull on to meet that top demand? And what if we just tried to flatten that curve a little bit and brought that peak demand down? Have they ever thought about doing that? And if we did that, it would mean people would have to actually conserve and think about, maybe I don't need to use everything all the time, and why don't we have that kind of discussion where it's more of a thought about how much you're using instead of trying to meet your demand all the time? And so I thought that was really good. It's a different way to look at it, and to learn to live with less is something that really could come through in the report better, and should come through in the report when it gets written, I guess. But that would be a really good topic to add to that. Microgrids, how can reduce energy loss through the use of microgrids was another topic. And then quickly, I'll just say we talked about climate smart land use. There's a big overlap in LU 4 and 6, which I think we want to address. And then kind of along the lines of that budgeting or accounting, how many trees do we need to offset greenhouse gas emissions? What does it take to sequester carbon, and how much if we planted 100 trees, what would that mean? Is it like 100 solar panels? And so again, it's that relationship piece. So I guess I'll leave it at that. Unless you guys have something to add. Anything else?
Thank you.
Okay.
Take it for the sustainable waste management. So I'll start on some just high-level comments we did have on the targets. Similar conversation on the targets. There was some conversation around, some of it seems too soon, that if we've already gone up 17% from 2018, it feels challenging to get to reductions for 2030. And also there was some conversation about kind of what would it mean if the city were not to meet those goals of in terms of kind of community morale. What's the impact if we don't end up reaching those? That was most of our conversation around the targets. In the mitigation measures, we had some conversation about certainly on waste management, financial incentives to offsetting generation of waste for what would be required to implement the measure, and also a generally community campaign that engages community leaders. As far as blockers or barriers, certainly a lack of funding was discussed, a lack of kind of public engagement and awareness of the issue, and just making sure that we're addressing kind of the community's concerns and impacts. In terms of seeing this measure implemented elsewhere, we're fortunate to have somebody with some experience elsewhere. There were some examples. Boulder, Colorado seems to be a prime example of, there's a climate initiatives department. Did I get that right? A climate initiatives department. In Boulder, they have a composting program. They did experience some contamination issues. Composting program in Brooklyn, New York, which seems to work well. and also programs in Amsterdam, which has had similar issues with, it sounds like, contamination and pests. An interesting point on from Boulder, the City of Boulder presents the pathways similar to what we have in front of us today. And in terms of community engagement, they sort of open it up to community members to decide where they want to contribute, where they want to volunteer and assist on which pathway. So that was kind of a global comment. Good example from Boulder. In terms of who or what groups need to be involved, certainly a laundry list here of neighborhood leaders, school curriculum, private service providers, and definitely kind of chambers of commerce and industry members. Who could be left out, potentially, or of the benefits or harmed? This all, I think, potentially adds resource demand on the city, and we talked about potentially, along a composting program, could there be harmful impacts on composting in, for example, disadvantaged communities or potentially more densely populated communities? And then any measures that are missing, we talked about single-use plastics, the kind of end use of compostable items, making sure that they're actually compostable in the facility that they're ending up in. And we did talk about, we had a kind of brief conversation about the life cycle impacts of municipal assets. For example, we talked specifically about vehicles, and when that comes around to how does the city dispose of vehicles once they've expended their useful life, and thinking about that from a solid waste, sustainable waste management perspective. So I think that's it for us.
Sounds good.
Tim.
All right, we did, this is adaption, starting with flood resilience, where we spent probably too much time on flood resilience, but I think what was interesting is that the focus of it, there was an awareness from the January storms, for those that were around here, seeing the record flooding from January 10th and 13th back to back, I think raised some awareness and lifted a sense of urgency for everyone around. So the idea of using those opportunities for messaging and understanding risk, I think, was important to the group. As to what we do about it, that's a bigger challenge. They're easy to pick out the barriers. There are issues with costs. You can only do so much hard mitigation, seawalls, raising roads, buying up properties, taking them like that, things like that. So that was an issue. There needs to be opportunities for funding and opportunities to work not only for the city, but collaboratively with neighboring communities as you think about dealing with infrastructure that's impacted by flooding, specifically transportation infrastructure. Let's see, what else do we have? Property rights. If you were to establish a district, a flood district, what are the homeowners then put in a position where, they are challenged to be able to just sort of have that autonomy to do what they need to their homes? Would there be resistance to that? Does that raise insurance issues? Those types of issues came up in terms of flooding and flood resilience. And then the social vulnerability and equity issue sort of stemmed out of a conversation about retreat, and that retreat should be a real option, which we may not have really hit on in some of our priorities here, but potentially abandoning either infrastructure or certain properties. And if you do that, do you do it in a socially equitable way? Spent a little bit of time on the heat resilience. I think in a nutshell, everyone feels that Portsmouth doesn't really get that hot all the time because of the proximity to the ocean. But there are periods of time where we do experience high heat, and the vulnerable populations are really where the focus should be. The thinking was it doesn't have to be a whole lot of investment into new infrastructure to protect from heat, but there might be value in sort of a double-edged sword, or Peter was talking about with tree planting and opportunities for green space to help mitigate some of the heat on the a little further inland in the city, and hope the North Atlantic stays cold enough so that you get that nice sea breeze that you often get here in Portsmouth. So, and the last bit was energy resilience. We didn't have a lot of time. We sort of cut ourselves short, but EV charging came up as something that really needs to be focused on and dealt with here in the city. And then also more opportunities for solar, things like solar canopies and parking and things like that. But we didn't have a whole lot of time to delve into the questions on that subject. So.
You are last. Yes.
I better go fast. Everyone wants to get going. All right. So the items on the targets we've heard from the other groups, so we won't touch on them. So we were building energy conservation and efficiency, and a couple takeaways, and my group will chime in if I miss something. We need a glossary. We need to define some of these terms. So we had a lot of conversation about what does net zero mean? What does fossil fuel free mean? Are they talking about the same thing? Can we be more consistent? So that was important. For ours, one of the first priority community measures related to tax incentives, and it was agreement that we shouldn't lead with anything to do with taxes. That shouldn't be the first thing we come into. And that maybe we want to lead more with providing financing options or providing incentives. There may still be tax incentives in the conversation as one of the things to pursue, but that we lead maybe a softer entry. Across our measures, a lot of discussion around the importance of partnerships, funding sources, and incentives, trying to incentivize as opposed to just require. And where there is going to be a new requirement, whether it's building code related, that we be super clear about what it is we're requiring. And that we consider the cost and who's impacted in the implementation process. Does it require additional city staff? Is it an onerous oversight process, or is it going to be fairly straightforward, and can we communicate that so that folks know that there's a change? And we were talking about the fact, like, how much do you have to measure if the goal is to be net zero? We don't want to like over measure or set up systems that are constantly over calculating things if we're trying to push all the systems to be at the net zero level. Clarifying which standards we're going to meet and what choices, what pathways people have within the pathway to get there. We did talk a little bit about whether or not the community could be more restrictive in its code in setting a higher standard for energy. We talked a little bit about Durham and what Durham's done as an example of that. Some of our conversations came back to, what has the state enabled us to do as far as like pace and other things. And so we had questions around those. And not just new buildings or retrofitting a building, but also identifying municipal buildings to go after that maybe need attention. Maybe they aren't in line for a needed retrofit, but they're so energy poor that we should really try to target them over time. And we wondered if having the streetlights on here is needed. It's kind of a low-hanging fruit item. It's underway. It should be just happening. So if we need to make room for another measure, we said you could move that one and make room.
Sure.
We did talk a little bit, not enough probably in our time here, because some of these we had a hard time kind of relating to like who's getting left out. But in talking about building energy conservation, we talked a little bit about renters and other people. And we talked about, how can we share ways for people to voluntarily reduce their energy use or reduce their impact, and show that there may be financial rewards for them if they were to take some steps, like to empower people to take action, which I know has been part of the conversations of many people in this room. So just continuing to share that through outreach and education and other ways. We did look also at the clean buildings and transportation and agreed that it should just be transportation or some kind of transportation as a theme. We also noted the school department kind of shows up in the municipal side there. And so talked about what that partnership looks like. To what degree did they have a plan, or have they set any kind of standards to try to hit? So we did talk about that. And I think those are the biggest things, probably, given the time we're at. We also I captured some notes just in general from the group, and we heard them pop up. We heard trees pop up. We heard some other things pop up from other groups, but we'll include it in our notes.
Sure. Okay.
You want this back?
I have a mic. Just next steps in the planning process. So thank you everybody for participating tonight. Sounds like some really good comments. High level reorganization of the pathways, some more specificity, some glossary. All good comments. We're going to continue engagement. By the ambassadors that we talked about and presented on before at workshop number 1 and workshop number 2. To further reach target communities that aren't represented here today. We'll refine the mitigation and the adaptation measures that, based on the feedback that we've gotten tonight. We'll post a new version of the community handout once those actions or measures are refined. I should note that there is going to be a survey posted tomorrow, I believe, with the very same questions that you've looked at and reviewed and answered tonight. So anybody that hasn't had an opportunity to provide their feedback on the prioritized actions may do so. The community handout is going to be up on there in a consolidated format, as well as that survey. So look for that at Portsmouth Climate Future, that website. Yes?
Do you have a by when I'm responding to that survey?
We usually put a 2-week time frame for those types of surveys. It is an involved survey. Answer as much as you want or as little as you want. And then the third one is confirming the greenhouse gas emission reduction target. So we're going to take the feedback again. But, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we're going to be taking a look at the measures and just making sure, doing a gut check on, whether or not they can be achieved. Is the 2030 too soon? If it is, how far do we have to push it back? Is 2050 too late? Can we advance it a little bit further? And then we're just going to be developing the full cap. So in the coming months, look for additional word on the development of that. We post monthly updates to the website, so keep your eye on that. And, that's it. So thank you very much. Anybody that wrote things on their worksheet, please pass that to the facilitator, and the facilitators would collect them. Yes.